we thought it made sense for our football team to make the move, and that's why we did what we did. And, we feel pretty good about going into tomorrow. We have really 4 picks, and we were kind of going into the day with potentially having only 2 picks. So, we feel there's football players that are out there that can help our team. And like we talked about the other day, our whole goal and job is to try to improve the team to help us win games. We think that this effort will hopefully aid in that pursuit. So we'll see how it goes tomorrow. We had conversations throughout, I would say, once we got to a certain point there, in the middle of the draft, we'd had some exchanges back and forth, and then as we got a little bit closer, there was a few more calls, and Minnesota had expressed an interest, and, we went back and forth, and then we decided that, this made sense, so we made the move. No, we talked about the other day, we were ready to pick. We had a few players that we actually had in mind that we were going to talk about to consider picking, and, then we decided to make the move that we did. So no question, we had players that a player we would have taken. A few of them remain, I would say. A few of them remain. So, I think if you look at it right now, there's a lot of good football players. I think there were 11 front 7 players that had gone. I want to say 7 defensive backs. So I think there was 18 defensive players. There was 9 offensive linemen, which this definitely was a deep draft on the offensive line, and that was the feeling, at least from our perspective, going in. Only 1 quarterback went, a couple skill guys went, the 1 tight end went. So, it was certainly, I'd say, a defensive-oriented draft, and the front 7 took precedence, which I would say does on a yearly basis. If some of those players start to come off and, then we want to make a move up, we have maybe a little more flexibility to do that. So, I think we're open to anything at this point. So we'll have to see how it unfolds, tomorrow once we get started. Mike, to tell you the truth, not really. A lot of the players that were drafted, we had sort of expected that they were going to go, not necessarily in the order in which they did, but I wouldn't say there were too many surprises. I think things kind of fell in place. We knew, like I said, the offensive line was definitely going to be in as it turned out. We had figured there would be 7 or 8 guys that were picked. There ended up being 9. So the front 7, we figured there'd be a fair amount of players that would be picked, and that's the way it turned out. So I wouldn't say there was too much that was all that surprising about what happened. You'd have to ask them about that. We don't really. It doesn't really.
Did it surprise you to see the Dolphins move up that high?
That they did what they thought was best for their situation. So, I think the unique thing is probably Minnesota doing what they did. Picking 3 players in the first round. I don't know what the stats are, like how many times that's happened in draft history, but probably not that much. So, if you want to put, say something that was different in relative terms, that'd probably certainly be one thing. So, they, we agreed to the terms of the trade, so they were interested in doing it. We thought it made sense, so there was a match. So when you talk to Rick, see what he has to say about that one. So I think we feel that there's players sort of littered throughout this draft. There's, I'd say, certainly a number of good football players that are still up on the board. I think there's some players that potentially could have very easily gone in this round, so they haven't. So, that second, third round, we thought there was some degree of value. It's in the draft, so, we're in a situation right now where hopefully we can capitalize on that, but it just gives us the flexibility to do a few different things tomorrow. I think it was like a pick or 2 out, and, we got on the phone, we went back and forth, which I would say it's very indicative, I would say, of how trades are consummated. There's some teams have discussions before the draft, maybe at the top portion of the draft, like we talked about the other day in here. I'd say it's very similar to what happened in last year's situation when we made our move up. Wasn't something that we had talked about, that we had necessarily planned for, but, we picked up the phone, we got on the horn, and, we ended up making the deal. So I would say that typically that's how most trades sort of happen, and I think it's very player specific and it's player based on the team's level of interest, the team's their perceived need, and then you come to some agreement, and that's why we ended up doing what we did. I did, yeah. It was neat. We were sitting in there, and I think somebody asked, "Are they booing him?" Because we have the feed from our people there. But no, I think that was that was a neat moment. I don't think something like that has happened, in the history history of the draft. And I mean, Joe's a great ambassador for this organization, for this city, and what he's done. I mean, he's made endless contributions. Forget about on the football field, but just in terms of his contributions to the organization. I think this was another example of that, you know, with the jersey and the message. And I think everybody is still wary and cognizant of what had happened, and even in light of some of the recent developments over the past few days about the potential impact on New York. I mean, it's a very sensitive sort of subject, but you know, Joe's a great human being. I mean, he's a great ambassador for our program, and it was a cool moment. We'll go back and, you know, I mean, we have some time tomorrow, so we'll kind of get organized here this evening. Just kind of jot down some last-minute follow-up notes, and then we'll get ready for the morning and get back at it.
Nick, once Minnesota stopped going, did you stop talking to the teams, or did you have a call?
No, we were still communicating back and forth with